So this is the first gathering of our uh, Orthodoxy by GK Chesterton group. So the plan was we went over kind of the first chapter and we just wanted to have a discussion about it. And Neil thought it would be a good idea, and we can do this of just kind of round robin reading the first chapter because it's pretty short. We can make it through. Um, and so I don't know how we want to split it up, but we can get someone to start and we can just kind of go for it.
I could start.
Sweet.
Will you
And
just
then
read the whole thing? Because it might take me a while to find my copy. I was just doing audio books.
Well, I figure I'll do a paragraph. Someone else wants to jump in with the next paragraph, and then we'll just go from there. So
Okay,
yeah.
I won't do it then.
Yep. All right. Chapter 1. Introduction in defense of everything else. The only possible excuse for this book is that it is an answer to a challenge. Even a bad shot is dignified when he accepts a duel. When some time ago I published a series of hasty but sincere papers under the name Heretics, several critics for whose intellect I have a warm respect, I may mention specially Mr. G.S. Street, said that it was all very well for me to tell everybody to affirm his cosmic theory, but that I had carefully avoided supporting my precepts with example. I will begin to worry about my philosophy, said Mr. Street, when Mr. Chesterton has given us his. It was perhaps an incautious suggestion to make to a person only too ready to write books upon the feeblest provocation. But after all, though Mr. Street has inspired and created this book, he need not read it. If he does read it, he will find that in its pages I have attempted, in a vague and personal way, in a set of mental pictures, rather than in a series of deductions, to state the philosophy in which I have come to believe. I will not call it my philosophy, for I did not make it. God and humanity made it, and it made me.
I have often had a fancy for writing a romance about an English yachtsman who slightly miscalculated his course and discovered England under the impression that it was a new island in the South Seas. I always find, however, that I'm either too busy or too lazy to write this fine work, so I might as well give it away for the purpose of philosophical illustration. There will probably be a general impression that the man who landed armed to the teeth and talking by signs to plant the British flag on the barbaric temple, which turned out to be the pavilion at Brighton, felt rather a fool.
I am not here concerned to deny that he looked a fool. But if you imagine that he felt a fool, or at any rate that the sense of folly was his sole or his dominant emotion, then you have not studied with sufficient delicacy the rich romantic nature of the hero of this tale. His mistake was really a most enviable mistake, and he knew it, if he was the man I take him for. What could be more delightful than to have in the same few minutes all the fascinating terrors of going abroad combined with all the humane security of coming home again? What could be better than to have all the fun of discovering South Africa without the disgusting necessity of landing there? What could be more glorious than to brace oneself up to discover New South Wales and then realize with a gush of happy tears that it was really Old South Wales? This at least seems to me the main problem for philosophers, and is, in a manner, the main problem of this book. How can we contrive at once, or how can we contrive to be at once astonished at the world and yet at home in it? How can this queer cosmic town, with its many-legged citizens, with its monstrous and ancient lamps, how can this world give us at once the fascination of a strange town and the comfort and honor of being our own town?
To show that a faith or philosophy is true from every standpoint would be too big an undertaking for even a much bigger book than this. It is necessary to follow one path of argument, and this is the path that I here propose to follow. I wish to set forth my faith as particularly answering this double spiritual need, the need for that mixture of the familiar and the unfamiliar, which Christendom has rightly named romance. For the very word romance has in it the mystery and ancient meaning of Rome. Anyone setting out to dispute anything ought to always begin by saying what he does not dispute. Beyond stating what he proposes to prove, he should always state what he does not propose to prove. The thing I do not propose to prove, the thing I propose to take as common ground between myself and any average reader, is this desirability of an active and imaginative life, picturesque and full of a poetical curiosity, a life such as Western man, at any rate, always has seemed to desire. If a man says that extinction is better than existence, or blank existence better than variety and adventure, then he is not one of the ordinary people to whom I am talking. If a man prefers nothing, I can give him nothing. But nearly all people I've ever met in this Western society in which I live would agree to the general proposition that we need this life of practical romance, the combination of something that is strange with something that is secure. We need so to view the world as to combine an idea of wonder and an idea of welcome. We need to be happy in this wonderland without at once being merely comfortable. It is this achievement of my creed that I shall chiefly pursue in these pages.
But I have a peculiar reason for mentioning the man in a yacht who discovered England, for I am that man in a yacht. I discovered England. I do not see how this book can avoid being egotistical, and I do not quite see, to tell the truth, how it can avoid being dull. Dullness will, however, free me from the charge which I most lament, the charge of being flippant. Mere light sophistry is the thing that I happen to despise most of all things, and it is perhaps a wholesome fact that this is the thing of which I am generally accused. I know nothing so contemptible as a mere paradox, a mere ingenious defense of the indefensible. If it were true, as has been said, that Mr. Bernard Shaw lived upon paradox, then he ought to be a mere common millionaire, for a man of his mental activity could invent a sophistry every 6 minutes. It is as easy as lying, because it is lying. The truth is, of course, that Mr. Shaw is cruelly hampered by the fact that he cannot tell any lie unless he thinks it's the truth. I find myself under the same intolerable bondage. I never in my life said anything merely because I thought it funny, though of course I have had ordinary human vainglory and may have thought it funny because I had said it. It is one thing to describe an interview with a gorgon or a griffin, a creature which does not exist. It is another thing to discover that the rhinoceros does exist, and then take pleasure in the fact that he looks as if he didn't. One searches for truth, but it may be that one pursues instinctively the more extraordinary truths, and I offer this book with the heartiest sentiments to all the jolly people who hate what I write, and regard it, very justly for all I know, as a piece of poor clowning or a single tiresome joke.
For if this book is a joke, it is a joke against me. I am the man who, with the utmost daring, discovered what had been discovered before. If there is an element of farce in what follows, the farce is at my own expense, for this book explains how I fancied I was the first to set foot in Brighton, and then found that I was the last. It recounts my elephantine adventures in pursuit of the obvious. No one can think my case more ludicrous than I think it myself. No reader can accuse me here of trying to make a fool of him. I am the fool of this story, and no rebel shall hurl me from my throne. I freely confess all the idiotic ambitions of the end of the 19th century. I did, like all other solemn little boys, try to be in advance of the age. Like them, I tried to be some 10 minutes in advance of the truth, and I found that I was 1800 years behind it. I did strain my voice with a painfully juvenile exaggeration in uttering my truths, and I was punished in the fittest and funniest way, for I have kept my truths, but I have discovered not that they were not truths, but simply that they were not mine. When I fancied that I stood alone, I was really in the ridiculous position of being backed up by all of Christendom. It may be, heaven forgive me, that I did try to be original, but I only succeeded in inventing all by myself an inferior copy of the existing traditions of civilized religion. The man from the yacht thought he was the first to find England. I thought I was the first to find Europe. I did try to found a heresy of my own, and when I had put the last touches to it, I discovered that it was orthodoxy.
It may be that somebody will be entertained by the account of this happy fiasco. It might amuse a friend or an enemy to read how I gradually learnt from the truth of some stray legend, or from the falsehood of some dominant philosophy, things that I might have learned from my catechism, if I had ever learned it. There may or may not be some entertainment in reading how I found at last in an anarchist club or a Babylonian temple what I might have found in the nearest parish church. If anyone is entertained by learning how the flowers of the field or the phrases of an omnibus The accidents of politics or the pains of youth came together in a certain order to produce a certain conviction of Christian orthodoxy. He may possibly read this book, but there is in everything a reasonable division of labor. I have written the book, and nothing on earth would induce me to read it. I had one purely pedantic note, which comes as a note naturally should, at the beginning of the book. These essays are concerned only to discuss the actual fact that the central Christian theology, sufficiently summarized in the Apostles' Creed, is the best root of energy and sound ethics. They are not intended to discuss the very fascinating but quite different question of what is the present seat of authority for the proclamation of the Creed. When the word orthodoxy is used here, it means the Apostles' Creed, as understood by everyone calling himself Christian until a very short time ago, and the general historic conduct of those who held such a creed. I have been forced by mere space to confine myself to what I have gotten from this creed. I do not touch the matter much disputed among modern Christians of where we got it, where we ourselves got it. This is not an ecclesiastical treaty, but a sort of slovenly autobiography. But if anyone wants my opinions about the actual nature of the authority, Mr. J.S. Street has only to throw me another challenge, and I will write him another book. All right. So were there any thoughts that everybody had kind of walking away from this one that came to mind?
I just think that, like, just generally, I just, it's real easy to like start like a treatise like this kind of yeah, I have like these revolutionary ideas. I love how humble it is, and just how light how light, but also, he's taking it seriously, but he's not like, this is of grave importance. No, this is just sort of my thing. This is how I came to this conclusion. This is how I discovered that I'm really just sort of replicating a pattern, I just think it's really refreshing, because a lot of these sort of treatises can get very labored and kind of dull. And unlike what Mr. Chesterton says, I don't believe that this is very dull. I was having fun reading it. It was great.
Matt, you read a lot of Chesterton, right?
Oh, you're muted.
You're muted. Yeah.
Yeah, I have in the past. In fact, one of the interesting things for me reading this was how this did not even register as like the beginning of the book for me. The first couple times I read Orthodoxy, like I'd see this part as such an intro that I was like kind of surprised we were stopping here. But that being said, yeah, I can't help but think about some of the ideas he kind of brings out further on in the book, and I do think that this kind of is a good intro, a good setup. It also, I was actually telling my dad about this earlier today. I think it has a couple of examples of one of the things that didn't bug me the first time I read Chesterton, but now like reading again, bugs me a little bit. And it basically has to do with the power of his prose and how good he is rhetorically. That he sneaks in a lot of like phrases and statements in the guise of like black and white, either or. Well, this is this, and so this must be this. And a lot of times he'll just do it poetically, where it's like the opposite of what he just said, kind of a thing. And those little aphorisms or whatever, little sentences, are funny because they're so good rhetorically, but when you actually like think about them, you're like, wait, is that really true? Like, I think one of the things he said is like, whenever you set out to write something like this, you should always say what you're not writing. And I'm like, should you? Or is that just like a rule that you're following and saying you like everyone should, kind of a thing? And then that always spins my mind out about like, what is he doing with that? Like, why is it, why is he choosing that? And so some of it is a reminder for me that he's like primarily a good writer, and not that's not to take away from his thinking at all, because he's incredibly intelligent. But yeah, that was what struck me most about this, reading this again, was just like how good his prose is, how good of an introduction this is, but that little thing to watch out for where it's like the phrase is so good, and it sounds so cool, and it's such a great turn of phrase, but the actual, he hasn't proven anything. It's just kind of an assertion put very well.
Mm-hmm.
It makes me think of, or something that makes me think of is what things we write or do that will stand the test of time. And he himself admits when he starts that he's writing this in response to a particular person or a colleague, and a lot of some like the yachting reference, like how many people actually, I mean, we know what a yacht is, but is that really something that is the best reference more broadly? And I go back to the parables of the gospel and how, I don't know. So I mean, obviously they've withstood the test of time, but that's the benchmark for the comparison or the analogy that stands the test of time. And I think you're right, Matt, that there's always a temptation to make something more relevant or apt in the moment. Like, what will people of today think? But as I read the rest of the book, I was happily surprised by how relevant it still stayed. I think he does the contrast deliberately. That's kind of his rhetorical style, like you said. But a lot of writers of that time, I feel like, have not withstood the test of time because they're always frequently referencing things that are not relevant in the present across all time. And with the exception of this street guy, whoever, I have no idea who this street guy is, but I kept thinking CW Weeks, but instead of CW Street or whatever, but that's probably just a Freudian not slip on my part. So, but anyway, but aside from that, like, I felt like the entire thing was completely relevant. Yeah.
Well, and I think it's interesting to, it all started with heretics, and he writes this book, and I don't know, this is like, okay, this is my definitive answer. I'm going to write this. And then it gets this response from critics like, oh, nope, you didn't do the job that you should have done. I just like how it's this response that has aged better, I guess. Like, this is what people read. They don't often read heretics. It's not super common. And I've read it, and it's pretty good. Like, there's parts of it that I still reference and stuff, but this by far has caught my attention much more than the first one. And so it's this also like refining process going back and forth and bringing about something that, I don't know, he seems to talk about writing like as if he wrote it and then threw it off and just said, oh, this is my response. But I don't know, it's also just really impressive too. So
yeah, I think it's, to me, just sticking to the first chapter, because I think you're right, the ideas get a lot more interesting, like you said, McMull. But just the first chapter, it's, to me, it captures just the the writing process in general of, okay, fine. He's clearly someone that's very keen to write, but he's like, at the end of it, it's like, okay, I'm done with this. I just want to get this out of the way, and I'm not even going to read it. This is too dull. But like you said, this ends up being the one that stands the test of time, as compared to the Heretics, which was the original, I'm trying to fill out my idea thing. And it's, I think part of that has to do with, like you said, he's rediscovering something that was never lost. He's doing all of this thinking and ends up at the 1800-year-old tradition, and which has got like it's got a renewal thing to it for the time, and that I think translates to every time since then, because it's referencing something much older than it and bringing it afresh.
definitely, I really related to that too. Of that, I don't know. What's really interesting to me is, Chesterton's writing this like 100 years ago, or more, and his rebellious youth, kind of the way he talks about it, even later in the book too, very much, I don't know, I related to that like very personally, of like, oh, I just want to be like right, and I don't want to be right for right now. I want to be right like in the future. I want people to recognize that I was doing the right thing or had the right ideas. And then Chesterton puts that perfectly with I wanted to be 10 minutes ahead, and I was just way far behind. I'd missed the boat or missed the train.
Brian, you haven't said anything yet. Any thoughts?
Oh yeah. Perfect. My mic is working. That was my big pro. So for me, this intro is really good in introducing you to Chesterton's humor, and not even just humor, but wit. As I was reminded reading through, it's like, if this book is a joke, it's a joke against me.
Mm.
He's making fun of himself in his own words as he defines it. And that's not just humor, that's wit behind it, as we're finding, like, we look at this character he's creating through his own words of like, in this rhymey kind of way, poetically done, it's very witty, and it sets you up what is to come. It's like, this is a serious topic, but we're able to have that humor behind it, that wit, that intellect to define.
But I like that he went straight at his sophistry. Am I pronouncing that right? Sophistry, right?
Mm-hmm.
I see a lot of myself in Chesterton. Is that 90% of what you see of me is ridiculous. But it's all clothing. You know, we got to wear clothing, because if I was 10% real Neil intensity all the time, I drive everyone out of my life because I'm just way too intense. I just need to, you know, and so if you're not going to be, I see a lot of myself in Chesterton, and the reason is because, like, if I'm not going to be talking about the really intense, heavy hitting topics, the things that really matter, then I might as well try to laugh or have joy or be jovial, or, you know, like what else is there? You know, you might as well either appreciate the good times and the good things, or discuss things that really, really matter, because there's no in between in my, it's why I've always struggled with small talk. And yeah, so that's it. So anyway, so this is the first book of Chesterton I've ever read, but I see a lot of myself in him. But he's clearly a staggering genius of you know, writing. So
one thing that came to mind, because Ryan brought up the passage about if this is a joke against anybody, this is a joke against me. If that's the conclusion to this, and it reminded me of the passage. Can't remember where it is, but it's Paul writing about the gospel and saying, well, if this is wrong, then like we are the most pitiful of all people, because we've been thoroughly duped if that's the case. And it feels very much in that same line of like, if I'm wrong about this, I am like an absolute fool, and you know, I'm okay with that, because that's the risk I'm willing to take. At least that's the takeaway I took from it.
Yeah, I think there's something else going on, intentionally or not. I'm not sure. Not like as opposed to what you just said, but in addition to what you just said, which is what came to me was the end of the book, which I'm not going to spoil, but it, you know, the end of the book also ends with some, if not wit, then at least joviality in the concept of laughter. But I think that even with the examples that he gives, you can see kind of the structure of a joke. And I think that it is actually, so the structure of the joke, or just the irony, basically, the irony of leaving Britain on this, you know, like your ancestors going to conquer the world and just ending up in New Brighton or whatever, South, whatever he said. And so that's
somewhat
kind of
shitty, like Wales.
Yeah, that's kind of like a funny, you know, that's a funny story. It's a funny idea. But I think that it's inherently connected to that contradiction or that paradox that he's trying to interrogate, which is, how can life or the earth be in one sense this crazy adventure that we never feel quite capable of, but then it can also have this sense of exactly where we're meant to be, this very kind of home safe, nested and nestled place. And I think that there's something about that contradiction that also speaks to the humor and the wit, because in order for something to be funny, there oftentimes needs to be that kind of contradiction of at-homeness and the enchantment of otherness kind of has to be that those two things kind of have to be relating for something to be funny most of the time. So yeah, that's what stood out to me. And to it, you see it kind of as the pattern of the rest of the book, because he brings out all of these contradictions where either something is at the one time both one extreme and the other extreme, or it, you know, it's some minuscule thing and some great thing. Like he's constantly doing this throughout the book with Christianity, with belief, with doctrines, where you just see this kind of contraction and expansion and irony. And yeah, it is often funny. I'm not sure. Yeah, that's kind of like what you were saying, Neil, about it being so relevant. I'm not sure how much of the relevance is due to just his kind of intellect and the quality of the prose and the, yeah, like everything we're talking about, or if it's relevant because of its kind of perennialism. Which leads me to the other thing that came up in my mind when I was reading it earlier, which was when it says it's a companion to heretics. I just that gave me a little chuckle, like as a heretic, because this book has been quite the companion to me over the years. You know, so I was like, aptly titled. Like, yeah, he writes this book called Orthodoxy, and most of the people I know who are a little bit heretical in some way or another really love this book.
Well, have you read Heretics, Matt?
I think I did, but it would have been like 8 years ago at this
So
point.
one of the things he brings up is like he makes the point that everybody's a heretic, that fundamentally a heretic doesn't mean the same thing as a blasphemer. It's somebody who kind of is willing to stand behind their beliefs, if I remember correctly. And so he firmly identifies into the heretic camp. And so that's part of one of the joys of reading that book, is that he's like he's not calling people out. He's among them at the same time.
Yep. It's coming back to me. You well summarized. Honestly, we should have got Tayo to read it, because he would have sounded closer to Chesterton than we do.
Oh no, I think Neil, you guys did a great job. I find it interesting that it's assumed that it's a comedy. I mean, he sort of forces the comedy position on the story of leaving England to go on an adventure and rediscovering England, and seeing the absurdity and the irony in it lends itself to the comedy. But that same story could be told as a drama that ends in disappointment and sadness and just complete world breaking, yeah, drama. So there's an assumed posture to the way it is bringing the story forward.
Mm-hmm.
Also, probably good to say that at this point too, that this is like C.S. Lewis was obviously inspired by Chesterton in many ways. And so you can, even the like idea of Narnia, which is like just enchanted Britain, you know, it's not like you know, the idea of something being safe and home, like your true home, but then also this wild and uncomfortable other.
Mm.
Like a crazy land that's hidden within a wardrobe in your old grandfather or whatever's home.
That's an excellent point. I think that's like what a lot of good fantasy is it's about the contrast. Like, I feel like he even talks about it. Like I read a little ahead, talks about it a little bit, you know, like the contrast. Like, you kind of need the Shire in order to see just how crazy Mordor or you know, Gondor is, or Minas Tirith, that just how insane that is, and just sort of get a good appreciation for it. I don't see enough of that anymore. It makes me sad. Everybody wants to be so internally consistent. Just give me like a lamppost. Like a lamppost and dragons. Come on.
It's like it defines here, it's that need for romance in this story. We find like this interest in the England discovering it. There's a romance to it, and so like it goes on to like how we can be astonished by the world but find comfort in it. Like there's so much unknown in that world, but we find a settling comfort in that, and that's that romance we have experienced throughout this, as he's defining in this first chapter. And then he goes on and he's like, we need to be happy in this world without comfort.
Mhm.
And it's very interesting.
It's the opposite of most apologetics. And this is why I really like it, because most apologetics are, here are all the reasons why I'm right. Number one. And so the apologetian, they assume the role of the arena. I'm going to tell you about the arena that you're in, and this is why you should change to be more in tune with the arena. And whereas this book is like, I'm the idiot, I stumbled upon England, and so he's like, I don't know what that is, but like here I am, and I'm in a much better state of mind. It's the brilliance of Chad the alcoholic. Like this is the thing that Chad has taught me. That you cannot, and that's why this book is timeless, actually, because he's writing from the perspective of a human being, his own experience, and he's showcasing his soul, for lack of a better word. He's laying himself naked. So, you can with enough science that comes out, enough time, the ideas are deconstructed, are, proven wrong. But, yeah, but my words will never, what does Jesus say? But my words will never
Pass away.
pass away. That's right.
Mhm.
That's it. Yeah.
Is it worth bringing up the notion of Chesterton's Catholicism, as opposed, because a British Catholic is somewhat rare. Most of them.
He's not yet Catholic at the time of writing this.
Oh, he isn't?
He's Anglican at the time of writing this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, he makes the romantic Rome comment, in the intro. So it's kind of like, it seemed like he was already kind of thinking of that as like, home base in some ways, even if he hadn't been completely, sprinkled or whatever.
Well, I think it is interesting to place. Chesterton's quite a bit older than Lewis is. He's about I want to say 30, 40 years senior. So they really weren't in the same circles. I want to say I had read somewhere that Tolkien might have sat in on a lecture that Chesterton gave maybe once, but that's about as close as these kind of groups get to one another. But you have this next generation that has much more impact. Lewis and Tolkien kind of, are still talked about way more than Chesterton is. I think George MacDonald also sits in this Chesterton camp too, of these older, more poetical thinkers. And then you have the newer ones that have the bigger impact. Maybe I just want to pose the question, why do you all think that's the case? Why has there been so much more put towards the Lewis Tolkien versus their inspirations for the most part?
My best guess would be it probably had to do with just the gargantuan worldview shattering events of World War One, and obviously World War II afterwards, but both Tolkien and C.S. Lewis kind of having experienced those world changing events. I think it gives their work of more of a, there's an awareness there of the kind of globalizing nature of things. And but it's probably more true to just say it's because they wrote fiction, right? Like that would probably be the bigger, fiction used to be such a huge.
George MacDonald was.
George MacDonald and Chesterton wrote some the Father Brown stories too.
Yeah, there's a couple of good fictions by Chesterton. Yeah, some the detective, but yeah, I mean, it's a good question. Is it just that, yeah, but that the wars is what comes to mind first, and the
Radio.
the genre probably too, fantasy genre. What did you say, Tayo?
Radio. Lewis. A lot of use of radio during the war.
Yep.
And that got a celebrity up.
That's fair. I'm in. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just gonna, because J.R. Tolkien or British culture thinks of J.R. Tolkien the way German culture thinks of How do you pronounce it? Goethe. That's it, Goethe.
Goethe.
But Goethe was 200 years. Well, I guess Goethe was about 100 years before Tolkien, right? And it's interesting that the German culture has its kind of seminal mythos developed maybe 100 years before the British. But it's not like the British lacked Shakespeare, or I don't know. I gotta think about that more. But I think you're right, McMo, about the World War I and World War II. Sorry, Noah, about interrupting.
No, I've been processing too, because I think what Chesterton's reacting to in writing Heretics and Orthodoxy, this might be spoilers as well, is very much around the modernist, like the continuation of the modernist movement, the hyper kind of materialism that is starting to emerge, this collapse of traditional religious institutions. This is all kind of stuff he's continuing to point at. And the question is he just too early? Is he like is he pointing out the problems that are more academic, and then by the time he gets to Lewis and Tolkien, these are now like firmly implanted in the common people, right? Because you have the wars. That's a point where people are starting to be really disenchanted. People are pretty firmly moving that direction. And Lewis and Tolkien, like the radio thing too, like they're talking to the people now, whereas Chesterton seems to be talking much more to academics. He's naming Bertrand Russell, he's naming Nietzsche, he's in these circles kind of going back and forth, reading and writing. Maybe it's just a disconnect, especially in that era of, you know, he might be I think he's a richer kind of British person. There's this level of separation in my understanding of British culture then.
The most famous psychologists come from Chesterton's era. Like he is around the same time as Freud and Jung and Adler, and they're all coming up. And I think it is that romance of science uncovering the human mind. You know, there's still the expectation, and maybe there's a move, because you think of like the rise of Disney in the 30s and 40s. There's kind of a movement toward the creative and these new avenues of expression, like radio, like movies. I suspect. Yeah, and the, you know, having C.S. Lewis on the radio during World War II, I suspect all of that. Yeah, that's a part to play. It's almost like I think we're much more. I think today we are much more in the vein of Chesterton's time than we are. Like there hasn't been that severe destruction, hardship, etc. in the recent. You know, there hasn't been. You know, people say COVID is, and people don't know like how bad things can get.
Well, especially for Lewis. Oh, go ahead, Taya.
Yeah, I was just gonna push back lightly on that, because I think there is a sense that we are reaching peak deconstruction of everything, institutions, traditions. I think there's not been a world war yet, but there is a sense in which, just in the consciousness of most people, there's a detachment already there's a disengagement with reality that's already taken place, that I think it maps on very much more to the trauma after the war and during the war that Lewis and Tolkien were speaking to.
Mm-hmm. And I wonder, because they, how would I say this? Because of the places of how all these pieces fit together, the reason I think Chesterton fits now a little bit better, maybe, is because he hit it, he was hitting at it at the beginning of this kind of turn. If we're kind of starting to turn out of it, that's why he's able to, I don't know, seem more relevant again. Is that if the culture is turning, he seems to be following that turn, as opposed to Lewis and Tolkien seems to catch the collapse, and so They as you're kind of going down, they seem to be more applicable. I don't know what the word is, but
Yeah, he's at a crossroads. He's standing at a between two worlds. Like he's still able to speak the medieval language, the romantic language. It's the romantic language, you know, that you were mentioning, Ryan. I wrote down strange and secure. He's got the security of the arena and the motherland or the fatherland. But then in that land, he's able to explore and be in love with the history, the culture, the land. Yeah, he still has that idealism, that joy. Yeah, practical romance. I really liked it.
well, there's some things that don't seem to. Maybe I'll play devil's advocate a little bit, like that don't seem to have aged super well, and I think that's because of the world wars. The whole thing about, I don't know. He takes it as a given that people think life is essentially good. I think that's one of those where I think before the world wars there was not a lot of people who had been exposed to like extreme hardship to that extent. And I think there was a lot of nihilism that creeped in from there. And so Nietzsche kind of caught that wave. And I think that's why, at first, why Chesterton, I think, has a lot of ambivalence about Nietzsche. Also, another spoiler alert, but
I listened to Dan Carlin's Hardcore History on World War One. This was a long time ago. But one of the things that struck me about World War One, the way it started, is that everyone was really excited to go to war, both sides. They were really excited. And they were like, it was like, we're gonna lift up the pride of our nation, and it's gonna be a glorious thing, and we're gonna have and then the way Dan Carlin describes it is within about 2 months, it was a meat grinder. That's how he described it. Because the old notions of like, we're going to valiantly just step out to war, yeah, gave rise to. But the reason, Tayo, that I was saying that I think we are in a similar time is that I see culture being deconstructed in that, like the grand narratives, there are no uniting, like Game of Thrones. We talked about this in a corner, that Game of Thrones was the last one. There are no like sort of grand narratives within the culture that are uniting. We're all separated, and basically everyone's pursuing their own happiness, bliss, whatever they, you know, pursuing their oh, this is what I like, so that's what I'm going to do, me. But the thing that hasn't been deconstructed is, for lack of a better word, the science, the technology. You know, we still trust our devices. We still trust that we are advancing scientifically. You know, yes, that's also somewhat fading, but I think the fact that it's somewhat fading, it's more of a fading in the trust of institutions versus the underlying science itself. And so I think at Chesterton's time, the rise of psychology, the rise of, you know, I see that as the time period where the left brain started getting this ultra prominence. Like, we're going to solve the problems of, I mean, Chesterton even talks about globalization, but like, we're going to solve the problems of humanity with science, technology, et cetera. We're going to do it. And then, you know, Chesterton's firmly a right brain dude, but he doesn't disregard the left brain thinking. So that's why I do think it's relevant, like you were saying, Noah. Sorry, I'm talking a lot. But yeah.
I was just looking over overlap too, because he. Let me double check when was Orthodoxy written?
1908. I just looked it up.
Oh, 1908.
Yep.
So, I mean, there is a little bit of that thread throughout, like British kind of academia, that he still, I think, is a legacy that he's still kind of challenging. Jeremy Bentham was about 70 years before, like he died 70 years before this book was written. And I think he's kind of one of the fathers of, well, he's the father of utilitarianism, which I think is also is kind of the undergirding philosophy of a lot of this movement of you know, defining progress as material, very much finding out, you know, if we just had more technology, we could be better morally. But, and you made a good point about the Titanic, Neil, that the Titanic was 5 years before this too.
No, after this, 5 years.
Oh,
but
after this.
it's right around the
Yes.
same time frame. So my mind goes to the conversations of the rich people up with their cigars in the, you know, talking about, oh, this ship cannot sink. I believe in our technology and our engineers, sir. We have the science.
I do want us to keep going on why and how it's relevant for our time, and because I think I think there's more meat on that bone.
Mm-hmm.
And I definitely don't disagree on its relevancy, but I think you make a good point, Noah, about the trust, and there was still a presumed goodness in the world, like that is speaking to. There's science is still very exciting. It's still very exciting to be an academic and to be in academia, writing books, and he's clearly just spitting out books, very excited. Any product, go for it. Like, I'll keep going. I think I don't think we're there anymore. I don't think, yes, there is still a trust. We still trust the plane, still trust our phone, we trust what we're doing now to upload to YouTube or whatever. But there isn't there's not that excitement. There's not, most people for they're at least jaded. If they're not completely deconstructed, they're at least jaded by all of it. And there's an anxiety to, I mean, the AI conversation and things around that. There's an anxiety to the age that we're in that I think he still speaks to you, but it's different to the time that he was writing to.
Well, building off of that, I think one thing that I've been thinking about for a little bit now is about how Chesterton's talking about the new world frontier kind of thing where, you know, everybody's leaving to go find new lands because then they can discover it. You're thinking about science too. We're on the forefront of this new scientific revolution. Everything can be written about. If you have an interest, you can like make your mark on the on scientific progress, and you can make a difference. And as time goes on, we seem to we find new frontiers, and then those get quickly covered, and then we kind of have to find more, but they seem to get smaller and smaller. I think the new world was huge. Like that was almost like just an absolute, that was unexpected. But beyond that, there hasn't been too much. And then as you see with like, well, now Google Maps, there's not really a place on Earth that has not been seen from space, right? There's just so the physicalness of science, of discovery in the same way has been kind of slowly decreasing of like the available exploration space. And then AI seems to do something similar with even art. It seems to kind of squeeze the life out of discovering something new, at least the feeling wise. I don't think it might not actually do that, but there is a perception of that.
Yeah, and just to add on to what you're saying, it reminds me of just the lack of excitement around everyone or the billionaires flying into space.
How about this for a oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go for it.
How about this for a similarity? What keeps popping up in my head is Ayana Hirsi Ali, and what she said her path to Christianity was, and it had to do with realizing she had some spirit. What did she say? She was spiritually starving or something like that, and then she basically tried to come up with a God she could believe in, and it ended up being basically exactly Jesus, right? And so you have that same similarity of like going on this trek to find this new land, and coming right back to not obviously not where she started from, but you know, right back to Christendom essentially in the good sense of the word. So I think that's something that's kind of like it points to the similarities. You know, this at this time is weird because it's right before, you know, the teens, but then you also get the roaring 20s not there long after, you know. And so this is kind of in some ways one of the heights of living in a big city or something like that. You know, they had the World's Fair and they would have had combustion engines and yeah, like everything you were talking about, Noah, like the kind of the idea of the world expanding and becoming closer to the individual. But then you've also got kind of the existentialists who are kind of the vanguard of philosophical thought. And so you could probably point to similar patterns today with the Silicon Valley and that kind of techno optimism, along with the kind of spiritual but not religious nuns. Like I'm just doing me. Like I'm, you know, it's up to you to kind of figure out what your metaphysics are. You literally have to figure out the universe that you want to exist in before you can even exist in it. So that's kind of, I think, some of the things that are similar. At the same time, well, another thing that comes to mind is like waves of feminism. So this would have been one of the, you know, on that kind of first wave of feminism where they were trying to get the vote and suffrage and stuff like that. And for the record, Chesterton was not for women getting the vote. He's got some funny he and again, this might be where I learned the fact that like he's such a good writer that he'll slide things past you if you're not careful. But yeah, he like wrote a beautiful chapter in some book. I can't remember which one it is, but it was like basically why women shouldn't be allowed to vote. And by the end of it, I was like, dang, maybe women shouldn't be allowed to vote. And I was like, wait, no. Women should vote. Women should vote. But maybe not. I don't know. But yeah, so there's obviously similarities now with the idea of there being kind of a lack of clarity in the kind of social structure, even, you know, whether it be an opening or a closing or however it's felt, there's upheaval either way. I don't know. I wonder, does that ring true for any of y'all?
Oh, I would agree 100%. It's like when you look at Chesterton's time, it was pre-war. Basically, more philosophical ideas was open, and there's a drive for spirituality. And then you have the wars. Everyone could come in agreement onto the war itself. So it's like, okay, we're in agreement here. And there's a time of spiritualness, like everyone agreed we needed something, you know? And so, yeah, a lot of people in World War II were either Catholic or some form of Christian. That was something that was true and ran true with a lot of people. Nowadays, we have a lack of spiritual. So it's a lack of what's going on this way. There's not a thing that brings us all together. It's all kind of just apart.
I don't think we're any. It's going to sound weird, but I'm going to try to make the case as best we can. I don't think we're any less religious today than we were 120 years ago. Now, I think most people would agree with that statement if I said the word spiritual, but I'm going to say the word religious. I don't think we're any less religious than we were 120 years ago. My sense is that most people went to church or did what they needed to do because it was expected of them and nothing more. And they did what they needed to do to climb or maintain their position in the social hierarchy. That's my sense of it in terms of the religiosity. Now, did it have a good effect? Probably. There's this nice scene in The Godfather 3, and I know The Godfather 3 gets a lot of it gets derided, but where Michael Corleone sits down with this cardinal, who then was the guy who becomes Pope in Godfather 3 for like a few minutes, and then he's assassinated. But anyway, so But Michael Corleone sits down with him, and his father hears his confession. But before that, he's talking about all the corruption in the church, and so this cardinal reaches down in this little pond, pulls out a stone in the pond, and he says, "You see this stone?" And he cracks it open, and so the outside of it's wet, but he cracks it open, and the inside of it's completely dry. There's nothing, and he's like, "Yeah, there's many such people who have been swimming or sitting in Christendom for so many years, their entire life, and yet somehow the water hasn't seeped in. It hasn't." And I think I'm not disputing that there were many, 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 many good Christians 120 years ago. I just think at any place and any time, the vast majority of people are the people who go along to get along and are mainly thinking of the things of this world. And I'm not saying that at the end of their lives, they don't think that they don't come more to God. Uh, they don't sort of give up the things of this world. I think that's sort of the natural progression of life. That's my experience. And that's one of the whole points that I think we're alive. But I don't know. People still have their liturgies. They still have their practices. They still have the things they do in their day-to-day life just to get through. And whether or not those are part of an online community or an in-person community that's not directly church, it's nonetheless the thing that's guiding them or directing them or getting them through. Yeah. So I don't know. This is a weird way of thinking about our religiosity. But yeah. Anyway, the one way of thinking about it is that the people who are going to church now really want to be there. For the most part, they really want to be there.
I think one way that might kind of fuse the two together, the two kind of perspectives, is that the people in the trenches all heard the same stories growing up. Like they all had that to draw upon. And the church was a way of providing those stories and that same kind of those same waters that they're all swimming in. And no matter what their reaction or the reason why they were there, they still had those same stories. And so it was something to unify them. And as you know, for good or for bad, as the modern era kind of comes in, it now says, well, now each person individually is going to choose whatever stories they want to listen to. And then you get to choose what your children listen to. And then they can rebel against you and choose whatever they want to listen to. And then it all comes down, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of structure to it at all. It seems to subdivide. And now there's no kind of unifying story or anything. Even within my lifetime in America, there's
no, there was. The last one was 9/11. We were
Yes.
united. I mean, 90%, but we were united
Yeah.
around a common enemy at 9/11. We
But
were united.
I can see the shift around like 2010-ish, where you start to see the reversal again, back to, I think pre 9/11 you had a little, like, from my understanding, again, I wasn't alive for very long. But you had this you had kind of like an anti-American sentiment generally. And you had also the hyper patriotism at the same time. You saw a reunification around a certain goal or topic or event, and then you had the subsequent dissolution of opinions and of perspectives. And yeah, it's been interesting even within my life. But
I think 9/11 was a really temporary respite. I think we were
Oh, yeah.
already trending in a certain direction, and 9/11 was just impetus to unite around something. But yeah, sorry, go ahead.
no, that was just what I was thinking.
I totally feel that. Just sort of this lack of a common narrative. I think that is in part, it may very well just be my experience. I'm not the most social of people, but I found it very hard to kind of speak to people my age. Myself and Noah are in the same age group as I believe Ryan is. We're all kind of the same. I found it very hard to talk to people about things that are, unless they're kind of surface level. Like, I think that we can sort of talk in vague terms about, like, I don't know. Even that is kind of falling apart. Like, I'm thinking about TV shows, but nobody really watches TV. They all watch their own like atomized streaming services, and they're paying out the ass for it. But like, I'm sorry, language. But you know that I can't really engage with people on the deeper ideas unless it's a crowd like this where we're already kind of bearing our souls a little bit and seeking something deeper. But like most of the people that I went to college with, for example, no, like I could not necessarily say that of them. They just wanted to go to their classes and get through it and sort of go home and sort of sit in their little spheres and play video games. And that's a coping method, but it hardly makes for a very interesting landscape. And one of the things that I've noticed with regards to we don't really have an underlying narrative or anything to unite around is we were talking about 9/11 earlier. I have seen so many 9/11 memes in the past like 2 years. Like, oh my God, they hit the second tower. It's like I've just noticed that. I'm like, this would never have passed muster, like even maybe
Never
5 years
flown,
ago.
you could say it.
I
I think
realized.
that's an age thing.
Yeah.
If you were old enough, I mean, I was only in first grade, but
I'm
by
the
the time I
oldest
was
of
in
all
middle
y'all.
school,
Yeah,
yeah, it was.
I was 16, so
Oh, I was I was like 2
yeah,
when
Neil's
that
the oldest
happened.
by a lot. Yeah, yeah. I mean, that was a big deal. I think the 2008 crash or recession was another big deal for grown-ups. I think COVID is another big deal.
Oh yeah.
That would have been y'all's equivalent. But ever since 9/11, to Neil's point, like most crises have just immediately devolved into two camps, or you're weird. You're either wrong or weird in most people's eyes if they don't have these activities to do. So
I've chosen weird.
yeah.
Weird is good.
Weird is the one to choose, and I think paradoxically it's also right. So but yeah, I guess that's how you get back to Chesterton. But yeah, I do think there's something more here about the romanticism and what he means by romanticism. Like, is he talking about the like romantic period, from maybe like 50 to 100 years previous to this? I'm thinking probably, he might be thinking of even the rest is history just did a thing on him. Who was it? What's his name? He's kind of like gay.
Lord
Picture of
Byron?
Dorian Gray guy.
Yeah, Lord Byron was who I was thinking of.
Oh,
But yeah, you've got like Byron and Yeats and like that kind of very British romanticism. Yeah, I wonder to what extent he's trying to recover some of that or kind of extol its Christian utility or in some way. I don't think I don't know. This might just be my history with reading these books in succession, and maybe I should look it up. But for me, this book is almost like a precursor to Wittgenstein. So I don't tend to think of it, or maybe he could be considered kind of that connection from the Romantics all the way through the existentialists towards some sort of Wittgensteinian language games idea. I'm not sure if Wittgenstein would have been aware of Chesterton or not. But yeah, I don't know. That might change the subject or whatever. But yeah, I guess the main question is, what does he mean by romantic?
Well, I definitely get like I'm trying to think of other people in the Romance era, like a Ralph Waldo Emerson, like that era definitely seems to flow through Chesterton in the way he writes and he thinks. That there are a lot of connections that he's making to I don't know. He writes very fondly of paganism, so that's part of why I say that too, is because he has a lot of appreciation for some of these aspects of especially European culture, but it's not necessarily European at all. It's just what he's familiar with.
I took it as his personal relational with the world. that he's just deeply enchanted and in love with the
like a
world.
hopeless romantic.
Well, but I would say that there's something beyond the hope, McMo, and it's the absurd, or beyond the
Well, yeah,
hopeless.
but I
I
just
should
mean,
say.
is that the way you think he's using the word? Because that wasn't the way I thought he. I thought that he
No,
was
I
referencing.
I don't think it was hopeless. I think it's related to the strange and secure that he was talking about. Secure meaning that he knows he's in his home, he knows he's in the right place at the right time, and strange in that there's all this mystery to all of the history and everything that he's learned, and he knows he's only come a tiny distance of that mystery, and that there's mystery surrounding him and everything and everyone.
Yeah, yeah. There, I mean, there is that kind of idea of romantic. Like, it makes you think of almost like attachment theory, and kind of what secure attachment actually looks like. In the sense that, like, there's a couple of good secular authors on kind of romance and eros, even in kind of the like in the context of marriage, but even just like how to do it right or how to do it well in a way that's not harmful would be probably their view of it. But it almost always involves both this kind of like safety, comfort, protection element, but also this freedom and exploration and room to breathe element too. So you kind of have to have both of those things, which is obviously like a mirror for what Chesterton talks about. Also compared to like a child at a playground, where like sometimes they need the parent, like when they're really young or whatever, they might need the parent to kind of follow them around the playground, but eventually they're going to want to kind of hopefully go play on their own. And maybe if they skin their knee, they come and run back to the parent and they get that love, and they realize that it's a safe place. But then hopefully that parent kind of encourages them, allows them to, like, hey, go play, be safe, but like go play. You're strong, you can do it. So I do think that there is that kind of secure attachment element that I don't know if he's necessarily trying to draw out when he says romantic, but I think there's certainly something there.
I know this is going to be a very unexpected connection, but when you're mentioning that, and what I was thinking of when I was reading it was also in my conversation with Moralon, aka CJ, talking about Dark Souls and how Dark Souls fills this very well. This kind of combination of the unexpected, the unexplored, the chaotic, and then also the comfortable, the campfire, the bonfire that you always return to or are trying to find the next one. And this kind of constant interplay and ratcheting up of tension by stretching off the distance between these kind of safe points. And so, you're comfortable if you can easily get back, but there are points where you're a little too far, where you could lose everything, or but it's also a long way back. And so I think that's in more like another practical way that plays out.
Should we go on to chapter 2, where McMo says it really starts? Do you want to go for double jeopardy, where the stakes really start to change?
I haven't read chapter 2 recently, though.
Yeah, I feel like we should stick to one chapter per recording. That way it'll be easily separatable for our memory and for the viewer at large.
Posterity. Do you ever think, so going all the way back to the question, you've thought once or twice, McMo, but going all the way back to the question of what stands the test of time, what of these conversations, if anything, do you think will stand the test of time? Or do you think, see, I have a theory, and I'm obviously biased here, so I have
game theory.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
I play a lot of games, but this is not a game theory. No. I have a theory that most of what's being produced by the internet is your chaffed thighs, Matt. Chafe. And
Come on, man.
but it's like but I have a feeling that some of the conversations and some of the things that we're doing in TLC will somehow catch the test of time. But we'll see. We'll see. Will all this be chronicled? The chronicles of picking up the pieces of history. I don't know.
Maybe it's an acting as if type of thing. You know, if we treat this as world historic, maybe it will screw around and accidentally make it world historic. But yeah, no, I doubt it. But I will say that the FBI servers are forever, you know. So
Only until World War III, my friend.
true. Yeah, then maybe we'll get a jubilee on all of our data. Doubt it.
Let me see what notes I have still.
Wouldn't you love to just sit with like a pint and a cigar with Chesterton and just like see what he had to say, you know, about what was going
he
on.
looks like Teddy Roosevelt's big brother.
Yep.
Like
Yeah.
he's like Teddy Roosevelt was growing up and was a small and puny kid, and Chesterton's like, come on in this New York City gym. I'm gonna make you a man. And
He
Chesterton
definitely looks like the type of person that spits when he laughs. He kind of reminds me of Harry Potter's stepdad, like the Mr. Dursley.
Yeah. He's not that rotund.
He's
seems
pretty
like-
rotund.
take a look at some of the later picks.
Maybe
there.
maybe it's later. Maybe it's more maybe I'm looking earlier.
Yeah, you're looking at the glamour shots.
I get a Thomas Aquinas vibe from his
After he did the after he did that biography, he like really let himself go. He was looking for that mystical experience. But that wasn't the way Thomas got it, old Gilbert.
I love how quickly we've gone from talking about how his work stands to be on time, and now we're body shaming him. It's brilliant. Yeah, this conversation that will stand the test
Now
of
we're
time.
body shaming Chesterton.
Yeah, body shaming will stand the test of time, apparently.
It's that tension, you know, it's that holding two things at the same time. Just accepting.
Yeah, he asked us to joke on him, you know.
Yeah, come on.
That is true.
I wouldn't say it to his face though. He'd probably roast my ass.
Can only attack the
Oh
greats.
my gosh.
Also,
yeah.
he probably looks just like me, to be honest. If I didn't shave my head and just rocked a stash.
Your hair is a little curlier, Matt.
Yeah, it is a little curlier. But if I had to wear a top hat all the time, maybe my hair would straighten out a little bit.
That
Oh,
would make you
yeah,
6'13". I made him freeze.
Well, to try to bring us back on topic maybe a little bit, one part that came to my mind was that in this chapter, Chesterton writes about his method that he's going to take for the following essays, as he calls them, about how they're a series of mental pictures and not a deduction. And it seems to follow kind of the way that we've generally been talking about it in this little corner, but then also just like, I don't know, with Drake, you and Ryan, and conversations I've had with both of you, how he's not interested in the propositional. It seems like he's trying to go a different route with this. So it's just an interesting connection I saw. I don't know if there are any thoughts on that.
Poetry is the language of images. It really is. So,
I mean, it gets you out of that sort of fighting mindset that you get with like a debate or like a polemic or something like that, and it sort of lets you engage a little bit better. We're on a friendly playing field, you know? It's nice. It's casual. Well, it's not casual, but it's like, you know, it's like this discussion kind of, you know? We're not enemies here. We're not going at each other's throats. I mean, we can. I don't think I'll do very well. I'm a poor duelist.
I wonder if my memory of the book is that he kind of starts turning up the heat and that it gets a little less friendly as it goes along, and it gets a little bit more like, if you can't see this, you're either wrong or crazy.
Dang.
Or probably both, kind of a thing. So, but yeah, we'll see. I'm really interested in kind of getting to the rest of the book. But But like, yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Drake. Like, it really is. The intro is just, he has a very kind of comfortable tone, and like, yeah, you just feel like it's not like most religious, like you were saying this earlier, like it's not like many religious books or theological or philosophical books that I've read, because you really do get that sense of like hospitality and like self-effacement and just kind of humility, I guess. Which, yeah, I think that's like, I don't know to what extent, now that I'm saying that out loud, that he's kind of like luring us in to just be like, oh yeah, this guy's just, he's just kind of, it's an autobiography, he's just telling us his story. And then out of nowhere, he's like, hardcore, best apologetics you've ever heard, kind of a thing. But we'll see. We'll have to see.
In that sense,
go ahead.
sorry,
Drake.
I was gonna say, in that sense, it does kind of play out like, you've been invited to a bonfire, and you start out and you're all friendly, and then as the night goes on, and maybe you're one or two or three or four far too many drinks deep, you start to get to the real deep stuff, and then you start to pry at the fault lines, and then maybe from then you get to a we get closer and closer to a resolution, spiraling closer to the truth, that sort of thing. I'm looking forward to getting pried apart by GK Chesterton.
I seem to remember a really late night bonfire where there was a conversation about Dune, and there were some takes about Dune that were very bad, that we've had in the past.
I remember this talk. This was a discussion between
So this is actually based in reality here.
I forgot.
We've got to hear this bad Dune take.
I've completely
Well,
forgotten.
no,
it.
I don't think it's Drake's. I think it was somebody else's, but we'll
Oh.
I have
Protect the
objectively
innocent.
correct Dune takes.
It feels like we're slowly winding down, but before we do, I do have this question ringing in my brain, which is, there's the image of leaving England to try to discover something new and end up back in England. And I think there's a sentence where it talks about building is heresy, and adding the finishing touches, and then they become orthodoxy, which I think also maps onto the same image of going out beyond the boundaries to return to the boundaries. I guess the question is, do you have to leave? Do you have to go on that journey, or could you just stay and realize the beauty of England without leaving England? Or the joy of being in England, the joy of discovering England while staying in England? And as it relates to orthodoxy, I guess the question is, do you have to break orthodoxy to appreciate orthodoxy?
I think you have to leave. And the reason I say that is, why isn't there just a one thing? Like, why couldn't God just make us perfect? Whatever our final form is, he could just, like, what's the whole point of time? What's the point of time for an all-powerful God?
I would put it slightly differently. Like, not so much that you have to leave, but like you can't actually stay. Like it changes, and you can actually only find it again if you leave. But if you stay, it just kind of sinks into, it almost becomes the background or something. It doesn't become. I think the work of the Christian in Christendom is kind of this constant renewal and this constant re-enchantment kind of a thing. And it's not, I shouldn't say constant, but I should say regular and returning and in the rhythm of life. Because I think that there has to be some sort of, it lets you down. Life lets you down eventually, and even if you're in the church, in a church that you want to be at, the waves come, and the storms of life come. And so maybe it's not particularly your church. Like my dad went to the same church until he was 45 or something like that, his whole life. But he had a philosophical journey that he had to go on. And so yeah, I think that there's different ways to take the journey. And the extent to which that metaphor applies, I don't think is necessary. You know, but I do think that you need some sort of breaking, some sort of contradiction, a tear, a rift, a conflict, or else you don't have really an identity, right? Like you can't actually talk about yourself unless you have some sort of narrative that you can remember, and you don't remember a narrative that doesn't have conflict, kind of a thing. So that's how I would put it.
I think that's the romance thing, right? It's the comfort and the something new. And if you're always at home, you're kind of stuck in the comfort. I don't know if I would frame it the same way, because I and maybe I'm reading into it, Tayo, but it sounds like you're almost referring to the deconstruction kind of stuff. And I think there is something in between. There is this being able to encounter without ever leaving home entirely. Like there is the in-between space that you can live in, but it's not necessarily like you have to go out on the ship and completely leave port.
It's an important point that Matt made, that the leaving home could, I'm not referring to a specific leaving there. It is a journey of leaving something that you valued behind. And it's almost a journey of abandoning certain axioms that you initially had, and almost necessary. That is what faith is. Faith is, I'm going to walk forward doing something that I didn't think was appropriate, relevant, useful, any of those things. And I'm going to leave behind something in its stead. Yeah.
I wonder if it's also connected to what he's giving an apologia for, which is like his philosophy. Like that's kind of the challenge, was to offer his own philosophy. And maybe there is a sense in which like you can't really have a philosophy unless you've at least kind of began to think for yourself. And thinking for yourself is kind of inherently this like leaving of home. Like you're no longer just believing everything your parents and your teachers taught you. You're now trying to have a theology, to have a worldview that's yours. And so, yeah, that kind of identity making, I think, yeah, that's what I mean to say, I guess, is that it's inherently connected, not to an identity having, but an identity making process, which he's trying to do when he's explaining his own philosophy, his own theology, obviously, too. But yeah, I wonder if it's like just more in direct response to that question. Like he's basically just saying, yeah, this is how I came across my philosophy, was I tried to go on this adventure and wound up, landing home. So,
well, and I think that's why he calls it dull, and he says it's probably going to be boring, because all these people are like exploring the vastness of the possibilities of what all these places could be, and he was content with just saying, you know what, like, be careful, like there's some bad stuff out there, like watch out. There's a lot of good stuff out there, but like be careful. And now he feels like he has to write a book that's in defense of home, and he's like, that's boring. Like who would want to read about like my defense of the obvious kind of baseline position? That seems bizarre to me. And so at least that's the understanding I get from the way he's writing this. He's like, I'm never going to read this because, it's just me.
There's this, I don't disagree. I think, no, I do disagree, but I agree with the underneath, which is you do have to go on a journey. There's no just staying still. There's no stagnant Christian life. It's you're entering the adventure of your life when you get into it. But I think there's you can go on that adventure while staying within the shores, and there's no, we don't need to leave to go on that adventure. But there's a sense in which even if you do leave, you will return back home. That's what I'm getting from it. But I just want to and again, the deconstructionist might be like the far to example, but even just having disagreements with the theology being taught, just something that simple can be seen as leaving. And I don't think you have to do that to discover orthodoxy. I think there are better Christians than I who just yes and what's being said from the pulpit and are very much keep their simple faith and don't have any reason to explore theology the way all of us who are too smart for our own good do tend to do. And in that sense, there because of life, they're still on an adventure. They're still going through change and they're growing because life forces you to do that. But you don't have to leave the orthodoxy being a box of safety for the Christian faith. You don't have to extend yourself outside of that to truly understand orthodoxy. You can just say, yep, this is me, I'm a Christian, and I'm just going to yes and the theology that I was brought up in.
Yeah, that's making me think that it's also connected to the the information explosion kind of a thing, in the sense that, oh, do you want to talk about GK Chesterton, puppy? It's connected to that explosion of information, because that phenomenon leads to a problem for Christians and Christian thought, which is that Christianity has always kind of operated on a least of these framework. And so that the whatever saves has to save the least of these. It can't just be for the smartest and the most erudite and the coolest. Like there's that kind of so when you start having a society that's driven by literacy and mathematics and these kind of our brains getting bigger and bigger, you'd think our extended cognition getting better and better. I think that's the element in which it's probably, like you're saying, Noah, weird for him to have to explain the baseline, and what should be obvious to all types of people. So I think that there probably is a kind of inherent irony in what Chesterton thinks about this stuff, which is probably why he's so skilled at kind of just talking about it with such a light hand, but also kind of a confidence, like an easy confidence. But I do think that it kind of, I don't know, it's also striking me now of that particular type of like posh British person. Like who's the gay guy that was with Jordan Peterson a lot? He very smart.
Dave Rubin.
Do what?
Dave Rubin.
No, he's British.
British. Oh, Douglas Murray.
Douglas Murray. That's the one. Like there is a little bit of that kind of British wit and intellectualism, that kind of, the way my dad puts it is, man, those Brits have a way with words. They have a way with words. And so I do think there's an element of that, like, banter, as they call it. It's got a bit of banter. But like, yeah, there's something that's striking me about that too, of just kind of, to Tayo's point, that like, I don't necessarily get the vibe from Chesterton that he thinks that this book is like necessary reading or anything like that. I think that he kind of understands that it's for a very particular type of intellectual who like wants to call him to account for what he believes, and he's just like, why would anybody really care about that? I'm just going to tell you what all of Christendom has believed for millennia and call it my own belief. And kind of like, I think that that's why it's like a ha-ha on him, because he's got to set it up this way so that it's doesn't come across as him like having these great thoughts and being like the perfect emblem of orthodoxy. Like he has to kind of put it in this autobiographical, this ironic tone. So yeah, it's all of a piece, I guess.
Well, and I think that's why it's so applicable today, maybe, is because maybe we're in the place that, to a certain extent, where academics were at his time, or starting to reach, right? The whole I don't know, the meme that like the average teenage girl is now kind of the existentialist and is now having all these deep thoughts, and that's very much kind of where we're at. We're like, you know, that yeah.
Well,
Ryan,
I know that the next thing he talks about is madness.
yes.
And so I'll have a lot more to say next time. So you'll probably have to keep me from taking over. But yeah.
I probably won't be able to make the next one we do, but I look forward to hearing your madness.
McMadness.
Do you have anything you wanted to add, Ryan? I know you've been quiet a little bit.
Just pretty much summarizing this, like what I was kind of grasping, it's like we call it to this uncomfortability. Without that, we're allowed to grow in our faith in any sense. So you need that uncomfortability. It was put beautifully in me a long time ago. We've observed by C.S. Lewis. We need that uncomfortability to realize once our deck, because C.S. Lewis puts it beautifully, our deck of cards is going to fall. Sometimes it falls a little bit, sometimes it falls all the way. You have to figure out, okay, how do I stack this back up? And figure out how to get back to where I left off at. And at the same time, build further. So you have to understand it's that uncomfortability. It's not like you're leaving a different place or going for something. You just have to understand, and rebuild and grow from that and become bigger. And have to understand why it fell originally, what you can do differently this time. How can this all play into your own life? So that's to me a little striking.
That's really good. I think that's the uncomfortability of kind of moving forward too, right? There's a fear that if you encounter something new that it will break everything down. And so sometimes that's where the comfortability is like it's the security of, you know, my beliefs, my place in life. If I don't touch anything, I can keep it here. I don't have to worry about it. But if I move anything, then there's the chance that it's all going to fall apart. And I don't know. It's scary to grow.
Like Marcus Aurelius in Meditations, when he's talking about work, you need to get out of bed, but it's comfortable here. Well, a man is called to work. He's called to use his hands, called to do all these things. But I'm still tired. It doesn't matter. You have to get up. You have to rise each day and set each day. So,
It's pretty good. Okay, I'll poke at Drake next. Drake, did you have anything you were thinking through?
Was gone for about 2 minutes. My apologies. Oh shit. Frankly, I'm kind of processing all of it. Come back to me, I suppose.
Oh.
Sorry.
Oh no worries. I think we've come to a good kind of closing point on a lot of what we were talking about. So I think we can pretty soon call it. I think we'll open it for any last words if people have any. I know, yeah. I don't know if I have anything to add. I think we kind of thoroughly explored a lot of this.
Well, I think when I was younger, I still believed in the necessity of the journey, but I believed in the necessity of the self-imposed journey. I needed to set what the journey was going to be. I needed to, set my own goals, walk my own path, etc. And the older I get, the more I appreciate that the arena, the scope and the boundaries and the parameters of the journey are primarily not set by me. And I find that if I lean into what comes my way, it makes for a better story in my own experience thus so far. So, yeah.
Okay. Last call. Any comments before? Nope. Okay, cool. Well, thank you all for showing up and sharing and engaging in conversation. It was great to have you all, and I don't know. It's just my wildest dream of like actually being able to talk about this book after years of kind of introvertedly dwelling on it alone. So I'm really happy to have this opportunity. So thank you all for being a part of it.
And
Thanks
thank
for
you.
the invite.
Always a pleasure.
Oh.
Thank you everyone for watching.
Auf Wiedersehen.